We are back here at BioIT World Expo for a panel discussion on personal genomics, and thank you for staying around. Joining me on the panel here are six real inspirational leading figures in various aspects of what some people at least call the personal genomics revolution. I'll introduce them briefly. The point of this session is to make it as interactive as possible. So after we have a few questions from the podium here, we'd like to invite as many questions from the audience as we have time for in the time allotted. 2 microphones in the aisles. Producers will come around and help you get access to them if you're wedged into the middle of a row. Okay, so do be thinking. I'm sure you've got plenty of questions, and don't let me do all the work, please. So Linda Avey, you've already met, the co-founder of 23andMe. In all of that, no one actually said anything about your background, but Linda, before 23andMe, worked at Pergen, Affymetrix, Applied Biosystems, a whole host of leading biotechnology companies before founding 23andMe. Next to Linda is Dietrich Stephan. Some of you heard Dietrich at the Best Practice dinner last night. One of our most notable Best Practice winner alums. And we joked that it's amazing how a little BioIT award can set him on the road to fame, health, and glory. Dietrich is the co-founder of Navigenics, and we'll hear a lot more about what they're up to in just a second. With George Church here, we almost don't need everybody else because George is involved in just about every facet of personal genomics, from being a long-standing developer of the actual sequencing technology. He's the co-founder of a company that no one knows how to pronounce called Gnome or Nomi or K-Gnome. He'll set us straight shortly. That's offering not whole genome SNP analysis, but whole genome sequence analysis to people who earn a little bit more than most of the folks in the audience. And we'll hear how that's going. George is also the father of the Personal Genome Project, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. Next to George is Jeff Drazen, also affiliated with Harvard Medical School. Jeff is a world-renowned researcher in the field of asthma genetics, but perhaps better known to you as the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, and doing a great job in bringing contemporary genetics research to the medical community. And he's also publicly on record with some strong opinions about the world of personal genomics and its current usefulness from a clinical standpoint. Next to Jeff is Fred Ledley, a longtime friend of the BioIT community. Fred has been involved in a number of startups, including Gene Medicine. He was a former president of Variogenics, one of the first personalized medicine companies. He's written and been thinking about this field of personalized genomics for probably longer than almost anybody on stage and in this room. And is currently on the faculty at Bentley College. I think the best basketball team in Massachusetts. You'll agree with me on that one. Yes. And last but not least, John Halamka. John is the CIO of Harvard Medical School. He is a technology expert in the field of healthcare. He's the author of a fascinating blog, and to prove I read his blog, Life as a Healthcare CIO, I think is the title. I know for a fact that this summer you'll be playing your Japanese flute on the mountains of Yosemite.
It's true.
So it's amazing the stuff you can learn. And you'll be blogging from there, I trust,
of course,
as well. Very good. And John is also one of the first 10 volunteers in the Personal Genome Project, and he's got the results, or some of the results at any rate, to prove it. So welcome everybody. Please make them feel welcome. Dietrich, let me start with you. So who won the FA Cup in... Navigenics has your company that you co-founded with David Agus. You're a neuroscientist and you're a geneticist by training. David is the medical wing of the company, affectionately known to his friends as Doc Hollywood, a well-connected oncologist in Los Angeles. And Navigenics unveiled its Health Compass personal genome service at a well, it was almost star-studded. Al Gore was there at an event in New York earlier this month. Tell us a little bit about what Navigenics is trying to do, and perhaps maybe if there are areas of similarity or contrast with 23andMe, it might be interesting to point those out as well.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel, and excellent talk, Linda. Navigenics is a company that's meant to be the interpretive engine that sits on top of the genome sequence, the copy number analysis, and the whole genome methylation analysis that happens, or that will happen at one point in a person's lifetime. And then all of that information will get put into a computer, and a rank-ordered list of your disease predispositions will be the output of that, so that you, with your physician in the established medical infrastructure, can be put on a focused prevention, focused biomarker, and other early detection paradigms to maximize your health and wellness, and not only have an impact for you as an individual, but reduce the burden of disease across the population. And so we really view this as a public health company as well. And we all know we're headed towards a healthcare crisis. In the next 10 years, Medicaid will be depleted. In 30 years, our healthcare costs will consume greater than 40% of our GDP unless we focus on prevention. And we really view Navigenics as the kernel to help people understand both their risk for monogenic diseases. We understand how to counsel for those. We have established medical genetics paradigms surrounding monogenic disease testing, but also common complex genetic diseases, which are caused by not only common variants, but rare and private mutations, and will need sequence analysis to capture those. And so very shortly you'll see us unroll a series of products that focus on capturing the rare and private mutations that contribute to common complex genetic disease, combining those with common variants, and really trying to capture as much of the predictive power as we can out of the genome to allow people to again balance that with their lifestyle and behavior. So that's what Navigenics is about.
And subscribers to the Health Compass, as it's called, I mean, one of the things you do is you offer a thick physician's report. I mean, you are encouraging people to take their genome data and talk to their doctors about it.
That's right. I mean, the company was really, again, started to make sure that it's fully integrated with physicians and the established healthcare system. The problem is that we had to, and this was conscious and by design, that we set up the business to start with in this privacy-assured way, since we didn't, until this past week, have federal non-discrimination legislation, and we don't routinely have encrypted medical records with no reach-through by the health insurance companies. And so until we get there, the information goes directly to the person who owns it, the member of the Navigenics Health Compass, and they get a physician report, which really aims to educate physicians in a grassroots way, in a bottom-up way, but we're also liaising with academic medical centers of excellence across the country, including the Mayo System and Harvard Partners and others, to educate the physician's physician from the top down, so that they really understand what a genetic risk factor is, that the effect sizes are directly on par and on the same scale as the environmental risk factors that we consistently publicly talk about from a public health perspective, and that there really shouldn't be any stigma associated with those risk factors just because they have the word genetic associated with them.
Okay. George, I also should mention that you're a scientific advisor to 23andMe, so I'm sure you may have some comments on what they're doing. But you've also established a company called Knomi, K-Gnome. You'll set us straight on that is offering for $350,000, I believe, full genome sequencing to people. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about. One might argue that's a little premature, or are you taking people's money when they should be waiting for the prices to tumble down? How is that going?
So it's a very interesting marketplace, and really I think it's very exciting that we have services like 23andMe and Navigenics that are more in the $1,000 range, because that's really where you're going to start educating people, their family, and their friends. Clearly the Knomi market is a very different one, where you might be talking about potential investors, people who want to get to know the technology. Maybe they have their own software staff that's going to develop next generation sequence applications, and they feel that they can get a better feeling for it if they know something very well and they know themselves very well. And rather than looking at Jim or Craig's genome, they look at their own. And I think that for for these sort of people, that's not a large investment. So I think all of them know how fast the price is dropping. I mean, this is dropping faster than, so that I don't think these are wise investors for the most part, and it's dropping faster than Moore's Law. It's probably in the 6-month doubling rate for quality and information per dollar. So, and that's partly due to the sequencing technologies that are coming along that complement the chip-based methods that are currently in practice in most of the direct-to-consumer companies.
And Linda, I think you alluded to this in your talk, but do you imagine a time in the not-too-distant future where you would ideally look to offer full genome sequencing, perhaps as a complement or perhaps replacing SNP analysis, given it must be able to offer more information than you can currently?
Absolutely. So we're definitely keeping an eye on all of these companies, and it's so exciting that there are so many that are in this race really to get to a $1,000 genome. And so we're all about the consumer and what they really are willing to spend for this information. And I think it's great that there's a wide offering of things right now. So we will move to sequencing technologies, but that said, even if you get your genotype done now, it's not like you're going to throw that data away. We feel like we could almost create all of our customers or turn our customers into bioinformaticists, because we could give them the tools to say, okay, here's how you compare your genotype to your sequence. Are you seeing correlation there? Are these data showing up the same in both technologies? And it gives them a way to do the QC of their own data. We think people really need to own their own information and take control of it. So it's definitely an exciting area, though, that we're watching.
George, how many people have signed up so far for your service, and where is the sequencing actually being done?
So the company is distributed, has parts of it in India and in China. The sequencing is being done in Shenzhen, where I'm a senior advisor to the Beijing Genome Institute. And I don't know the updated number, but I've heard that they may be exceeding the original predictions of how many they can handle in the first year. Right. Certainly 2 have been announced, one of whom is making his sequence public, which is something I was a little surprised by, especially considering how much Nomi and Navigenics and 23andMe have made efforts to keep everything private and work on security. Yeah. The fact that people are paying that much money and putting in the public domains strikes me as hopeful.
He's in Europe, though. He doesn't have to worry about private insurance, possibly. Right?
He still has to worry about employment.
That's
okay, yeah.
Well, if you can afford your service. But anyway. Jeff, let me turn...
Have you found the gene for wanting to show off your genome?
I think there's probably more than one.
Jeff, let me turn to you. You authored or co-authored an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine earlier this year, letting the genome out of the bottle. And you talked about a scenario where a man would visit his doctor clutching the results of a 23andMe or a Navigenics gene test that might put him at increased risk of heart disease or diabetes. And you wrote, the man would have been better off spending his money on a gym membership or a personal trainer so that he could follow a diet and exercise regimen that we know will decrease his risk of heart disease and diabetes. Do you think this is, are we making too much fuss about this? Is it too soon, or is it, you clearly seem to have some reservations.
Well, so first of all, you think I'm Jeff Drazen, but the people at the desk think I'm Access, temporary access. So that even with a small group like this, and not too terribly identifying a person, the computers couldn't handle it. So we have to be a little careful about our ability to handle large amounts of information without making mistakes, because right now I'm a mistake. So I'll tell you a story. I had a patient, and I still see patients on a regular basis. I mostly practice pulmonary medicine, and this guy had pretty bad asthma. And he liked to play hockey. So he would come, he was a computer guy, and he would come home from these long road trips, and he discovered that if he went home before he went to play hockey, he'd really get out of breath. And so he kept his hockey equipment in the car, so he could go and play hockey right from the airport and then go home. And it turned out he was newly married, about 6 months, and after taking a careful family history and discovering that his mother had asthma, his father had asthma, his brother had asthma, didn't have any kids yet because he'd only been married for a short while, I discovered that he had a strong family tendency to cat allergy, so we tested him for cat allergy. In fact, he had the highest IgE for cats I'd ever seen. It was in the thousands. And normal IgE for all allergens is like 100. So this is like the huge risk for this. So I told him about this, and he said, you have to bring my wife in here. So I explained to his wife that we had to get rid of the cats in the house. And she said, you know, I've been married for 6 months. I've had the cats for 10 years, and they were divorced. So here's a factor that somebody knew about where what they did based on that information is very difficult to know. So we have an area now that I think has potential promise, but we're a long way from utility. As a physician, sort of the evidence-based medicine side of me wants to know what's the positive and negative predictive value of all these things. To what extent will I be able to modify things? If you look at where we are with breast cancer right now, that's something bad. We have 7, BRCA1 and BRCA2 out. We have 7 alleles that we know about that are associated with risk factors on the ratio of risk ratios in the order of 1.05 to 1.2. So that if you look at a woman in the lowest Dewey decile, 5% of the population, her lifetime risk of getting breast cancer is like 6%. And a woman in the highest, having all the risk alleles, is like 16%. So you're talking about a difference on the order of 10 percentage points. And there we at least have a screening test that you could do. So you could argue that you would offer the screening test more commonly to the women that had the higher risk profile panel and less commonly to the women that don't have the higher risk profile panel. So that kind of makes sense. Now you look at the individual woman and you say, you're the same kind of person who can afford a $350,000 genome, but we don't want to do a $500 mammogram on you because you happen to be in the low risk profile, but you still have a risk of getting breast cancer. I mean, it's not zero. So that we're not at a level where the prediction is so good that you can get away without doing the screening tests. So we're learning. And we don't want to come across with the idea that we don't care about all this, but that the onus lies with you all. You're like a drug company that has a new drug. You have to show that it works. And I'm from Missouri. I really am. And you have to show me. And that means that you've got to do the studies that shows making a difference in knowledge will make a difference in how people behave. So you've got to, manage a group of people with the knowledge and a group of people without the knowledge and show that both you can inform them and they'll do something about it. And since I've managed a lot of people that had a lot of risk factors for diseases, and they said, well, I'm still not 100% sure I'm going to get it. So, or if I do all this stuff, if I run on the treadmill every day, it's going to make a difference. So it's hard to change behaviors. So long-winded soliloquy, but I think that we're not there yet. There's some promise here, but the onus lies with 23andMe and Navigenics and Genome and others to prove that it makes a difference. And you're at the interesting intersection of sociology, medicine, and predictive genetics, each of which has got really fuzzy edges. So I wish you good luck, and send me your papers when you show that it works.
We'll let them respond to that in a little while. Let me come to Fred. Fred, you've been leading companies and really at the cutting edge of personalized medicine for a very long time. And I know you've been talking about consumer genomics for years. I mean, you had a review in Nature Biotechnology back in 2002 really saying that consumer genomics was the answer to the future of healthcare delivery in this country, and you probably were talking about that even before. So you've really been a proponent and a leading commentator on this. How is it going? Are you impressed? Are you surprised at the way that companies like 23andMe and Navigenics, is it emerging as the way you thought? Better, faster, slower?
I guess the simplest answer is I'm confused. I think that I start really with 2 facts that haven't changed in the last couple of years, and that is that among the genetic tests that have been developed over the last 20, 30 years, there are probably half a dozen at most that fit any standard you would talk about of offering real benefit to particular groups of patients you can identify. And those tests are probably currently reaching less than 5% of the available market. They're not being used. And to me, that's kind of a gating phenomenon that needs attention. And on your list of what's coming together here, I think one of the important things in addition to your list is business models. And that as we've focused on this, having tried successfully and unsuccessfully a couple of different business models, including a few misadventures, there is a real problem here, and it's in part and parcel the problem that medicine is facing in general. New technologies are always expensive. I think one of the challenges for things that we're going to have to face, in addition to, I think what Jeff was alluding to, which is the efficacy of what we're doing, is the enormous cost that this is going to put on the medical system, both for positives and negatives. One of the problems with screening tests is there are false positives. They're quantifiable. The cost of one of the nightmares for the healthcare system, as we looked at it, is that people will do genetic tests and actually go to a doctor. Going to a doctor is what we all want them to do, but it's also very expensive. And as these things begin to spread, what are we going to do about it? Will people begin to use 23andMe and services like this in lieu of the doctor? I do believe the information technologies at this point are actually far superior to the quality of care physicians are giving in terms of counseling, particularly primary care physicians. Because remember, the specialists are really good at this. Pulmonary docs, cancer docs, neurologists are already offering very good care. But when we talk about screening preventative medicine, you're talking about family practitioners, you're talking about people in practice, and there's a lot of data that these people don't feel comfortable with it. People are coming and asking questions, and they're viscerally uncomfortable. Even the physicians themselves will tell surveys they don't think they're necessarily doing a good job. So I truly believe that the future of this is more like Walmart than the Mass General Hospital. I don't think we're there yet. I think when we've done marketing research, traditional market research surveys, for any of you who live in a high-tech world as I do, it's really striking to go to Steeplegate Mall in Concord, New Hampshire, where a lot of marketing surveys are done in New England, which has a Sears and a JCPenney's. Nobody can afford Gnome, who shops at Steeplegate Mall, and probably most people can't afford 23andMe. But to see the avid interest in genetics in those populations. And the question we asked a little bit is why? And the answer is, we don't have to tell the public that genetics is important. In fact, part of what we need to tell them is genetics may not be as important as they think. People who have a parent with Alzheimer's live in fear that they're going to die of Alzheimer's. And in fact, their risk is probably no more than 12 to 20%. But every time they lose the keys, they assume they're on the way down. So, you know, breast cancer. You have a parent with breast cancer, you're not doomed to die of breast cancer. The odds are still you'll die of something else. How do we get that across as well without overburdening the healthcare system? I don't have solutions. I perhaps am better at asking the question. But I do think that there is a market out there. I think beginning to think about it in traditional market ways is extremely useful. I think it's a whole lot bigger than you know, the sort of top percentages that we're talking about who can afford this, the people who are truly internet savvy, which is still not that much of the population that's at risk for diseases and so on and so forth.
We'll start taking questions from the audience in just a minute. So if anyone would like to ask a question, put your hand up. We'll get the microphone to you. And everything is fair game. John, let me turn to you. Thanks for being here. You're, as I said, the CIO of Harvard Medical School and one of the first 10 lucky volunteers
Indeed.
in George Church's Personal Genome Project. I suspect most people are aware of the goals of that, but perhaps you could firstly just briefly introduce people to what the PGP is about and your current experiences with it.
Well, to tell a personal story, so between the age of 22 and 32, I gained 100 pounds. So this is getting married, it's the CIO all-stress diet, it's 2 lattes every morning, supersized Big Macs, life on the run. Now, of course, I am a very analytical person, but really didn't think about family history or genetics. In fact, those pounds creeped up year by year. It wasn't a precipitous event. When I was working with George and team, of course, my SNP analysis came back and said I have a proclivity to weight gain. In fact, I have a twice normal risk of coronary artery disease. And 7 years ago, I became vegan, so environmentally, I mitigated, I think, some of the genetic risk. But if I would have known at the age of 22 that this is something that, I should really watch, and making that choice of that latte or that supersize as opposed to eating rocks and sticks, today, I'm healthy. I'm on no medications of any kind except B12 because I can't get that from eating just things that grow in the ground. The PGP, in my view, just at its earliest stage with SNP analysis and helping us actually document some of the probabilities, some of the statistics, is a qualitative way to assess your own health behaviors. And certainly I have tried to change my lifestyle, my environment, my activity based on the qualitative data I initially gotten back. Now, we all know genome-wide association studies aren't exactly perfect. And so when I looked at the initial data that George and team had produced, okay, coronary artery disease and weight and diabetes risk, I can see all that. But the Alzheimer's stuff, 5 studies suggest I'm going to be great and 4 say I'm losing the car keys tomorrow. So, I'm not really sure what to make about that. So I really look forward to the next step, which is now the exon sequencing. And so we're going to get to more granular, not just here's 500,000 chunks done on Affymetrix devices, but really, here's actually down to the base pair level what's going on. And one hopes that the evidence gets there, to your point, such that then I, through a decision support system as a patient, can say, now I understand at a very granular level what probabilities I may have, and then I can make my own shared decisions with my clinician about what to do about it. Whether it's a medical therapy, a surgical therapy, a lifestyle therapy. I'm a big proponent of the patient having total transparency to all their medical data, including their genomic data, and then having shared decision-making with their clinicians. And this is why certainly personal health records that include the genome are a very interesting thing to pursue from an IT perspective.
We've heard about security issues this morning, but another facet of the Personal Genome Project is to really put the data out there, correct? So would you like to talk about that and marrying the genomic data with phenotypic data? Perhaps George.
Sure. And so if you look on my blog, geekdoctor.blogspot.com, you'll see that all of my SNP analysis is there, my entire lifetime medical record is there, and this is done in a national standard format. One of the challenges we face in medicine is trying to actually get all our medical data in a semantically interoperable format so you can actually have decision support. A problem list, a medication list, allergies, laboratories that are actually computable. And so one of the other hats that I wear as chair of the Healthcare Information Technology Standards Panel for the country is how to codify all of the medical observations across hospitals and clinics and pharmacies and labs. So what you'll see on my blog is that national standard format where it's human readable and totally computable. So imagine that each of us has a computable lifetime medical record and our genome stored in some standard way. Certainly decision support systems of the future can use that to give us a much better personalized medical care delivery. Clearly, as part of George's first 10, we've all signed 35 pages of consent that say, yes, we're going to disclose lifetime medical records, phenotypic information, 3D photographs, and all the results of whatever sequencing he does. And, I was very happy to do that, but the discussions with my first-degree relatives were really interesting. So my daughter's 15, had to have the following discussion. You're about to start dating. Any parent of any boy you date can now look at my genome and decide if our family is worthy. How do you feel about that? And obviously, that's a little fallacious because its probability and a high likelihood of any parent wanting to go do that analysis is a little extreme. But obviously, as we sign such consents for release, we have to think of such very strange things like, well, before Gina, yes, we may have had discrimination by insurers or employers. On January 23rd, when we released my SNP information publicly, I was arm in arm with Charlie Baker, the CEO of Harvard Pilgrim, and we did this public release of my medical record and my SNPs. And I said, and Charlie, you're not going to cancel anything, are you? And so this was good. Having your insurer CEO at your side when you do the release is really confidence building.
That's good to know. George, you're now entering a new phase of the Personal Genome Project, and I guess you're looking for volunteers. So if you would like to, put out the call, I would like to give you this opportunity.
Thank you. We just got, what he's referring to is we just got IRB approval to scale up to 100,000 volunteers. If you're curious, you can look at personalgenomes.org. We're trying to do this very carefully, in that you will have to get 100% on an exam, not only about genetics, but human subjects research, so that you know what you're getting into when you participate in any research that could conceivably get your data out into the public domain, as John has addressed. And I think one of the,
And how will this be funded? Who's going to pay for all this?
So all of this is privately funded for the Personal Genome Project itself. We have very good support from the NIH as well for the technology development, which has resulted in some of these new sequencing technologies.
Well, let's see what's on the mind of people in the audience. We have a question in the front on the left here.
Well, first of all, this is all shocking and delightful and impressive, and I expect it to happen faster than most of you expect. I wonder to what extent there's an attempt to invite people, even now, to give consent in the future that any clinical records from their hospital visits, and also if they participate in studies, can be joined with the data sets that the different companies are compiling, so that you look forward and encourage this trend to unite even more data than is now being united.
Who would like to take that?
Well, I would just say that we're at 23andMe, we obviously have ties with Google, and with what Google Health is doing, and also Microsoft with Health Vault, we're very interested in eventually being able to merge directly into a personal health record. And so we're glad that those big companies are taking on that challenge, and it is a huge challenge to get the medical systems to turn over this information. But again, it's all about the consumer having access to their own data, and it's up to them if they want to merge that in with their genetics.
And just to amplify that, so Beth Israel Deaconess is the second site to go live with Google Health, and we've already done some things with Microsoft Health Vault. The idea, and I believe strongly, the patient owns their own data and should be the steward of it. And that means if they wish to participate in a clinical trial, donate it to the public good, share it with another caregiver, that should be up to them. So we've committed at Beth Israel Deaconess, whether it's Google, Microsoft, Dossier, or other personal health records, to make all this data available to the patient. The patient applies privacy flags. Obviously, because the patient is consenting, controlling, and uploading that data, we don't really run into HIPAA issues. Google and Microsoft are actually outside of the HIPAA cloud. It's no different than you going down to the medical records department, getting a paper copy of your record, and handing it to a family member. And clearly the patient has the ability to at any time remove the data from Google or Microsoft. We're just simply being a facilitator of what the patient wishes.
Okay, question here.
A very quick question, which may be very important. Dietrich pointed out that this is invention in prevention. So I'd like to propose a vote, both from the panel and from the audience. Suppose there would be a bill saying that all these monies that we pay for you guys, 350,000 or 1,000, it should be tax deductible, because we are saving the U.S. government money. Would you vote for this? How many votes?
Question over here on the left.
Well, actually, I just want to comment on that. We hired a new assistant, and she had been working for an insurance company, and she did all of the pre-tax claims that people were putting in. And somebody actually submitted 23andMe as part of their health costs to be deducted. And she's like, what is this company? So she started researching us and then applied for a job. So, but didn't get the tax write-off. They didn't get that.
So this is a science fiction question. Eugenics, Gattaca, and futures in that direction.
I'd like to take that one,
If
I may.
please, yeah.
I think that's a critical question, and I think there was a wonderful recent Nature editorial which described sort of the role of FDA and the role of all of us in self-governing this field and setting standards and policies so that we don't go down into the gray zone or the slippery slope of eugenics. And so just to let you know what we're doing internally through this self-governing sort of strategy is we refuse to test for non-medical related quantitative traits. We refuse to test anyone who is a minor and can't give informed consent. We refuse to test family units because of the high non-paternity rate. We're not doing ancestry testing because of potential blowback from people who, the first KKK member that comes out to be a 25% African heritage, their head's going to explode, and it's going to have severe blowback on the field of genetics. And so I think this role of the role of self-governance and also in making this information public, as you just alluded to, sort of selecting mates based on their recessive gene carrier status. Is that okay to do or not? Is it okay to select mates based on recessive deafness genes, for example, which a lot of people would argue are not disease genes. Those are really, really important questions, and I think everyone has a responsibility, both on our side of the fence and on the member side of the fence or the public side of the fence, to be careful about those things.
Fred.
Yeah, I think John brought up the intangible in all this, which is social pressures. You may prohibit discrimination in insurance, but of course that always depends on which administration and which Congress is there. Laws can be passed, can be overturned. But there is a long tradition for those of you who have kids or thinking of marrying, of the qualitative part. Gee, their father died of cancer. Did you think about that? And some of us have run into in our professional lives particular cultures, particular families where particularly women with histories of birth defects may be unmarriable. And in fact, some systematic efforts to try to test for things like that. So there are a lot of intangibles here. And I think, in our surveys, the issue of privacy came across completely different than it is in this room. And I think we have to be very careful of, sort of the general public sentiments, which certainly I believe are well-warranted fears about the privacy of this type of information.
Linda, we've not talked about the FDA and who should be regulating this industry, if it should be regulated. Some people will have heard that New York State seems a little agitated by some of what I think you're both up to. Would you like to comment on the FDA, what's the issue with New York State and how that will be resolved, and just the whole field of the whole question of regulation of consumer genomics?
Yeah, I think because what we're doing is so new, and I think everyone has the same goals. We all want to protect consumers. We want to handle this information responsibly. So we've been talking with the FDA, we're talking to CDC, we're talking to all of the organizations that really want to have a hand in how this gets regulated, and everyone seems to be very reasonable. And even within the state of New York, the state of California, we're very aligned with their mission of protecting people, and there are already laws in the system that protect you from fraudulent claims. And so if we can use those to regulate the companies, because there are some bad actors in this space already, and we're really wanting to align with the regulatory side to make sure that we're doing things properly. And so it's definitely an ongoing discussion, though, because you can't, a lot of times you're trying to make a square peg fit a round hole, and that doesn't always fit so well. And in fact, with CLIA, when we first launched, we were not working in a CLIA laboratory, and we just didn't feel it was appropriate because we don't claim this to be a clinically relevant test yet. It's genetic information, it's not a test. And so we've almost felt like coming out saying it was CLIA was going to be disingenuous to our customers, that they feel like that somehow gives it some sort of a clinical stamp of approval, which it absolutely does not. And so, we talked to CMS, and it was determined that it was better to be in a CLIA lab, so we made the switch. So again, we're doing everything we think is appropriate, but we also want to do it in a reasonable way.
Anybody like to add to that?
Well, I've got a sort of a general concern about the privacy issue and the regulatory issue and where you get out of control of regulation. So how many of you have a Gmail account? All right, so I have a Gmail account. I use it for private stuff, and I emailed a friend about 2 weeks ago if he would come down and help me put up a fence at our house on Nantucket. Now, I got a house on Nantucket because in the 1970s I worked in the emergency room, and land was cheap then. It's not cheap anymore. So in this email, I had the word fence in Nantucket, and I sent it. And then the next time I sent a Gmail email, on the side there, somebody was trying to rent me a house on Nantucket or sell me fencing. So what I'm concerned about is that if somebody's personal health information's out there and it's mined by these robots, that there'll be a company trying to sell somebody something based on that person's genetic profile that may or may not be any good to that person, and that some people will bite. And we know that some people will bite because all of us get email every day from someone who claims to be a lawyer for somebody in the UK that has 100 million pounds to give away, and if you just send them $50,000, they'll help you get the money. So I think we have to be really careful when we put information out there in searchable fashions. Even when you do everything you can in your company to stick within rules, there are people who will use it for nefarious means. I mean, not everybody in the world's got noble goals. And so I think that we have to be very careful when we put information out there not to let that happen.
So a comment on that, since I am one of the members of the Google Advisory Council, there are rules within that personal health record. Never will be data mined, never will be resold, never will be used for advertising. And the agreement, I mean, I'll just be honest with you, Google and Microsoft HealthWall are selling trust. That's really what they're selling. And as soon as they abrogate that trust, no one's going to use those services. They've absolutely said, Gmail's over here, search is over here, personal health record management over there, total separation.
Okay, we've got
So I shouldn't Gmail my medical record. It's there.
We have about 10 minutes or so left, so we'd like to go through as many questions as we can fit it in that time. We'll start down here.
This is all very exciting for me, but something that is terrifying, having lived through this myself and several friends, getting health insurance, long-term care, long-term disability. It's astounding how even minor things like low doses of antidepressant can raise flags. So the scary thing is, with getting harder and harder to get any of these types of insurance, what the ramifications are for individuals.
I totally agree with you. I think that's why we have David Brailer as chairman of our board of directors, who is a healthcare IT czar. Why we're so intrigued with the encrypted EMR system that Harvard's built. Why we've been lobbying for GINA. I think those are absolutely critical issues, and I think we're all agreed on those.
And Massachusetts, we're very, very conservative, and opt-in consent on an institution level for release of data is what we've done. In some states, like Indiana, is opt-out consent. We'll share your data until you tell us to stop. And we are very much recognizing that the patient is the ultimate steward of the data, and we should never do anything without your consent, whether that's clinical trials or research. So I think you'll find we are trying very hard to protect all this information.
Fred.
I think that the insurance issue is going to undergo very radical change in the next decade. And I think the key is Jeff's last comment, that it's when this community can actually provide some evidence that this reduces healthcare costs, which is really not out there at the moment. The logic is very clear, but in fact, the prediction is in a society with, people staying in health plans for an average of single-digit years, small single-digit years, in fact, it's an increase in health costs to those carriers. If we as a society here, if the informatic tools are being developed, in fact, do reduce healthcare costs, this insurance issue actually begins to be turned on its head. And in fact, the logic should be, and I'm sure some of you have tried to run the numbers, that you can predict reductions in healthcare costs, and then the insurance may actually turn and see these as benefits. And I think that's actually the long-term trend in the use of genetics in insurance.
Another question here on the left.
Hi, just stretching it slightly to hopefully a positive note. A lot of food shortages in the world at the moment, growing population. It's possible that we could save more lives by actually stopping people from starving, and one way of doing that is from protecting harvests from pests and diseases. So what are the potentials for stretching this so that we're actually doing individual genetics on a species other than humans and saving some lives that way?
I'll take that. The incredible rate of dropping in prices of genomics technology like sequencing is impacting every field in addition to humans. Already in the Personal Genome Project, we have microbiological components where you can rapidly survey drug resistance elements and so forth. I think the same thing is applicable to emerging diseases and agriculture and pests. So I think in a certain sense, we're going to be floating all the boats, and the more that's invested in one part of this field, it will not stay in that part. It will diffuse out by encouraging research and development in the basic technologies, and they're moving very, very quickly.
On the right here, halfway up.
Well, one of the things that I think it's important for this perhaps IT audience to understand, as a clinical researcher for about 20 years, is that there's always been a process of vetting clinical information through clinical research, that it's taken a certain amount of time, that mistakes occur, and that vetting process protects consumers or patients from the application of clinical research that happens too quickly. With this genetic revolution, we've got a situation where individuals, consumers, patients, whatever you want to call them, are interested in and even demanding health-related information before it's been, in essence, fully vetted and is secure. Now, various solutions have been proposed, as Linda pointed out, with the STARS and educating people, but I think this is part of the real question here. Can people, particularly people who are less sophisticated than the people sitting in this room, understand the limited utility and the limited validity of much of the information that's being produced? And I think that's why George's idea of a genetic literacy threshold to test some of this is a great first step to do that. I just want to say, as some of the panelists know, that for the last few years we've been doing exactly those kind of studies, Jeff, of people, randomized trials of groups that receive genetic risk information from susceptibility genotyping versus those who don't, and a manuscript is now ready, and I'll be contacting you at New England Journal with it. So great intro for me. Thank you very much.
Down here in the front.
I'm often puzzled by human breakthroughs in explaining otherwise inexplicable and complex processes. And one of my true puzzles is political decisions made in Washington. Would it be possible to kick in money and ask you to be generous with your services and perform these analyses in the executive and legislative and the judicial branches?
Well, so to that point, one of the things I asked George is, what if my genome shows the Machiavellian gene and I would never be electable to office? And his response is, that could be an asset.
Question right in the back, please.
So we're all excited, we'll get our personal genomes in whatever form, but will there be eventually a movement to my many genomes? Because it seems that at birth I have a naive genome, and then as I bear the insults of the environment, it changes, my methylation patterns changes, I've got new mutations, insertions, deletions, I've incorporated viruses, and as well I have this whole other genome of the microorganisms that interact with me, and I have this metagenome at various places in my body. And so do I really need my many genomes, not just my genome at one point in time?
Yeah, I can take that one. We're very interested in partnering with other organizations that are reading different parts of your genome. So for instance, cancer centers, a lot of them will now do a gene expression profile of your tumor if you unfortunately have one. And so if we have our customers getting diagnosed with cancer and they already have their genotype file, they could walk into their doctor and say, if this is useful, I can download my data and you can have it. So it becomes just another tool in the arsenal of trying to figure out the genetics. Is there something in the germline? Is it all environmental and it's showing up in the somatic cells? We want to be a part of that process. We know we can't answer all these questions, but it's a good start to start out with the genotyping and then move on as we learn more how to measure these other genomes, if you will.
Okay, we've got time for just a few more questions, so we'll try to fire them in. Here in the front, there we go.
So I want to come back to the privacy issue, and it's good to see that the company have a good infrastructure to keep the information secure, and also the company that will avoid testing some sensitive information. But because of the technology, it is very possible that people can get some material from somebody that unknowingly and do the sequencing by themselves, and like paparazzis in the Hollywood that retrieve a lot of things, and so then it seems everybody is very vulnerable to such kind of exposure that because of the technology advance. So I just want to know what the thought from panel on that.
Well, I can say from, I think Navigenics and 23andMe, we both use a saliva kit. And we didn't think about this in the early stages of developing the company, but you have to spit a lot to generate the sample to be genotyped, and there's no way anybody could steal that from you without you knowing it. So, and we won't genotype a sample where there isn't enough saliva in the tube. We reject it. So it was sort of a built-in control that protects you from someone stealing a sample from you. So, but we're always very vigilant about thinking through these different scenarios.
Just a quick comment on that. I'm awfully good at thinking of negative scenarios, and what you could do is you can make a synthetic saliva of the right volume and then put in whole genome amplification of a hair or dandruff into that. And so I think it's not a totally solved problem yet.
Oh, good grief.
And how do you know how do you know that the sample you get is actually from the person and not from the person's insurance company? You know, because you go for your insurance physical and they take blood and urine, and they say, you know, I'm concerned this guy's got a history of Huntington's disease. I don't want to insure them, especially his disability insurance. So they say their name is Joe Schmo, and they send the information to you. You figure out they have a risk, and then they just deny the person coverage without giving a reason.
If that were ever to happen, that insurance company would be in the news across the world that they had done something as horrible as that. So I think the court of public opinion is going to come out against these companies ever trying anything like that.
This could be known internally in the company. That's the danger.
Yeah.
Question in the back. Really quick question, please.
Oh, you know, we know about doctors when they're training, they get this condition and they think they have every disease. People get cancer phobia when they've had either cancer or they had something that's screening that could potentially be cancer. Piggybacking on what he said below, the differently educated will interpret as the more accessibility to these data for the lay public is going to have a huge impact, because the differently educated will interpret these data different ways. They're going to run to their subspecialists. They're going to have surgical interventions. They're going to be all over the place. While it's a great technology, and I'm totally applauding it, I'm wondering who is responsible and who can we depend on to speak to the managed care companies, or in the future if we have a national healthcare system, to deal with this. Because I've heard you say different things, but I'm not sure who can we depend on to scientifically and work with the healthcare companies out there.
Genomics.
No, I think your comment and Dr. Green's comment on vetting what is a real association is absolutely critical to not polluting a person's health record, for example, with misinformation. And if you look back pre-2000, there were a lot of false positive candidate gene association studies out there in the world that if you just simply linked from that base to that paper and drew your own conclusion, you would think you would die of 100 different things and you'd jump off a bridge and your life would be over, when in fact that's the vast majority of that information is simply wrong or not validated yet. And so it's absolutely a valid concern.
The final question from the audience before we just take some closing comments is up from the top.
Just a quick question. I come from Europe and I followed the Decode Genetic Biobank issue when the government of Iceland was taken over and the change of shareholders for Decode Genetics occurred. I wonder, in your case here in America, when you discuss inside your advisory council at Google or Microsoft, in case there are some hacking or merging with another company, what will happen with the rules to protect patient genetic information and what you block from data mining? Because that's the major concern when there is a shift from governments to private shareholding and threats of taking over by other companies.
So from 23andMe's perspective, I mean, we felt very strongly from the very beginning when we set this up that we wanted to maintain very tight control of the company. And so we wouldn't take venture capital money to an extent that they could control. We have no VCs on our board. We have observer rights for Google. They don't have voting rights. There are literally 3 people on our board. It's Ann, myself, and Esther Dyson. And so we feel like we have very good control of the company, and that was exactly what one of our concerns was, is that, you know, what happens if we got acquired or, you know, and a VC wants us to do something in a short time frame that we're not ready for yet. We feel very strongly we represent our customers and we take care of their data. We're the caretakers of that, and that is our mission.
And the agreement with Microsoft and Google is the patient will always control the data forever. And as I think you alluded to, the industry is its own watchdog in some sense. Everyone is watching these folks very closely, and if ever there is any notion of data mining advertising or non-patient control, these folks will not have products.
Let's just get some closing thoughts and comments. We'll start with John. It occurs to me that as remarkable as the progress we've seen with the advent, the arrival of 23andMe and Navigenics, Decode, of course, we should also throw into that mix, I guess. This revolution is just beginning. The sequencing technologies that are with us now and that are soon to debut in the coming years are absolutely extraordinary. There's a company proclaiming a single molecule sequencing platform that will sequence in 5 years' time 100 gigabases an hour. That's a human genome in 15 minutes, and based on preliminary data, I suspect many people think that's entirely feasible. So this stuff is coming to the research community and it's coming to the clinic faster than we can possibly imagine. Would just be curious where you think this is going and what leave us with an inspirational thought.
Well, sure. So much of what I do is work on technology and standards, but let's not forget the policy. That's actually the harder stuff. And so having crisp, well-understood privacy policies for the country is really a prerequisite to having bigger and better technologies that share data.
Yeah, I mean, as a one-liner, I think the business models are still way behind the technologies here. Issues like what happens in a bankruptcy court have never been tested. There are famous internet cases of mailing lists that are guaranteed to be private to the company went bankrupt and Disney bought them. The business models really need attention. There's a lot of experience, there are a lot of smart people. I'm sure there are very few at this meeting who take that as a mission and bring the same intelligence that the Dr. Geeks and the people bring, but you need that kind of partnership. I mean, I really applaud the kind of work 23andMe are doing to try to put all those pieces in Navigenics. But I do think the business models and the thought is still very primitive compared to the sequencing technologies. The clinical trial is going to be really hard, and that's going to be in the middle.
Jeff.
Right, so I'm concerned about this commercial personal interface. 15 to 20 years ago, pharmaceutical companies were considered the most ethical companies in the country, and you would talk to pharma executives. They would never do anything that could potentially hurt a patient. Then the stakes got really big, and it only takes a few bad apples, and you can see what can happen. So if the stakes get really big here, then I begin to get concerned. So I think that we can have policy, but as Fred says, to enforce the policy long term, as the ventures become more successful, is going to require incredible vigilance. So I want this to work. I am basically a futurist, but I want it to work so it helps everybody and just doesn't help somebody get rich at the expense of somebody else.
Thank you. George.
Yeah, I fully agree with those comments. We need to be very vigilant, and I think this certainly is getting the spotlight of vigilance. I mean, and it just needs to keep it up. The stakes will get higher fast. There's no question about that. And there probably will actually be deaths that occur, just like the automobile industry includes some deaths, and we tolerate it. But we want to keep that to an absolute minimum. And I think we're also seeing a moment of altruism that should be encouraged. If this is all about us worrying about insurance companies and risk and so forth, that might discourage some altruism. And I think the GINA bill is a step in that direction, and I look forward to that.
Dietrich.
I think the bottom line from our perspective is that there are only genes and environment that control our development and the course of our health, and to ignore genetic risk factors which absolutely play a part in health and wait a generation before all of the interactive models and the gene environment interactions are in place when there's an infrastructure to be built to appropriately manage it would be unconscionable.
Well, and just to follow up on George's analogy of the auto industry, that's one of the things we think about when we're talking to the FDA and these regulatory agencies is what are the airbags, what are the seat belts, what are the things we can start building into these services to make sure we don't have the problems that we know are probably going to happen, the false paternity cases, things like that we know are out there. But we do think, when you look back at the Model T when it first came out, there were people that were in accidents. We didn't go back to the horse and buggy. I do think the article is correct that the genome is out of the bottle. This is happening, and we need to do it together in a really responsible way, and that's what we're all about.
Well, just like the SNP chips, we've really only just scratched the surface of this particular issue, and I hope we can make this a regular forum at BioIT World. Please join me in thanking our 6 panelists today. And thank you for supporting the conference, and please enjoy the rest of the day.